Hello there, everyone. This is Robert from Reading Through History, and this is the series where I'm going to go through my state's U.S. history standards, point by point, to prepare Oklahoma students for the end of instruction U.S. history test. Now, granted, this is my state. I'm not declaring myself to be America's history teacher or anything, but anyone out there who has to take an end of instruction U.S. history test, the high school level, second half of U.S. history, this should be of great benefit to you. So without further ado, we're going to go through my state's objectives. And we're starting here with number 1A. It says, examine the purposes and effects of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That may sound like quite a lot, but really all you have to do to remember this is the simple phrase, free citizens vote. That's all you have to do. Because the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are in order. 13, 14, 15. Remember this little catchy phrase, free citizens vote, and you got it. Free citizens vote. Free citizens vote. The one in the middle is hands in his pocket. Free citizens vote. Check out this hat, looking like he's there in style to vote. 13th Amendment is going to free the slaves. The 14th Amendment is going to give anyone in the United States, born in the United States, citizenship. And the 15th Amendment is going to give free black men the right to vote. Or at least that's what these amendments were supposed to do. That's where you get to the effective part. 13th Amendment, very simple. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Now this one was effective in getting rid of the institution that was called slavery, which we're going to see in later installments, things such as sharecropping and Jim Crow laws and stuff like that's going to pop up. But this says you cannot be a slave in the United States of America or any of its territories unless you're convicted of a crime. You can still have the chain gangs and stuff like that, but slavery will be done. So this is going to formally abolish slavery in the United States of America. That era, those days are gone. This was passed by Congress on January the 31st, 1865, but of course, the state still had to ratify it. But Abraham Lincoln, the last year of his presidency, spent a great deal of time, effort, and energy trying to get this amendment in some form or another passed. It's going to be ratified by the states on December the 6th, 1865. I believe the state of Georgia, the former Confederate slave state of Georgia, was the one that gave it enough votes for it to become law. Now on to the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, outside of the Bill of Rights, may very well be the most important amendment in the United States Constitution. Obviously, if you're a woman and you like voting, you may say, no, giving women the right to vote was a big deal. But the 14th Amendment is a huge deal. Now, they passed this one out of fears of civil rights of the newly freed slaves, known as the freedmen, being overturned by the southern governments. It states that all people born in the United States of America are citizens. So if you're born here on U.S. soil, you're granted citizenship. Now this causes issues later on in history, but that's not really what we're dealing with here. This was passed to force the southern states to grant citizenship to the newly freed slaves. And this amendment was going to give equal protection of the laws to all American citizens. In other words, a state cannot take rights away or deny rights to any citizen. And if the newly freed slaves are citizens, they have to be treated equally under the law. No freedom can be taken away without what will be called due process of law. So, states cannot deprive a person of their life, liberty, or property without that due process of law. As I said, this due process thing is very, very important. Now, what's that mean? You have to be accused of a crime, have to get a warrant, they have to put you on trial, and a jury of your peers has to convict you before you can be, deprived of any of these things, life, liberty, or property. This also banned many rebel officers from holding state and federal offices. Now, why did they do this? Well, remember, Lincoln gets assassinated. Andrew Johnson, a former slave owner from Tennessee who was a Democrat who stayed loyal to the Union, he gets to be president. And he wanted Reconstruction over with really quickly. So he just kind of, in the year after the Civil War, he starts saying, well, everything's good. Let's let them all back in. And the Republicans in Congress were shocked when the southern states held elections and all these former Confederates and former, rebel officers start showing up in, Washington, D.C. Hey, I'm a senator from Georgia, like Alexander Stephens, the former vice president of the Confederacy. And the Republicans said, no way, this isn't over with. They're electing the same leaders. We're going to have the same problems. So they refused to allow those guys to take their seats, and they said, we're taking over Reconstruction, baby. So, state laws were subject to federal court review. Now, this is very important. This is part of that through line of history where the federal power and state power are always colliding. They knew that these southern states would likely try and pass all kinds of laws, which they do, to keep black men from voting, to try and keep the freedmen from having their newfound freedoms fully fulfilled. And there are all kinds of these laws in the South that we'll get to in later videos. But if a state passes a law that deprives someone of their rights or some group, the federal government can review it. And we're going to see plenty of that to come. It also gave Congress the power to pass any laws needed to enforce it. Now, these two items here, 100 years after the fact, are really going to start coming into play, because we're not just talking about the freedmen here. We're talking about things in the Bill of Rights. These used to not really be understood as applying to the state governments. The state, do they have to give you a trial, jury? Do they have to give you a lawyer? 100 years after these amendments were passed, states weren't honoring this. And you're going to see it with the Warren Court a lot, with the rights of criminals, the rights of the accused, the rights of handicapped people. Are you denying them a right to an education if these school buildings do not, if they're not handicap accessible? So this amendment's really important, not just because of what they did at the time with the rights of the newly freed slaves, but the rights of many more Americans, 100 years later. The 15th Amendment. This is the one that gave black men the right to vote. Notice it says men. If you look at the wording of this amendment, it does not mention women. Women are not going to get the right to vote till 1920. But this said they could not deny you the right to vote on the basis of race or previous condition of servitude. Now, this one's going to take effect in 1870. It's not going to be very effective for the next 95 years because of what we're going to talk about in future videos. I'm talking the grandfather clause, the poll tax, and the literacy test. That's not denying someone the right to vote on the basis of race. That's just making a literacy test that's almost impossible for someone to pass. You can just say, oh, well, you failed. Or, remember, a lot of these newly freed slaves were uneducated, so they couldn't read. So, this one is not going to be very effective. They're going to have to pass a congressional law, a federal law, in 1965, known as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, before African Americans' right to vote is really and truly protected in the United States of America. But that's it. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Just remember, free citizens vote. 13, 14, 15. Free citizens vote, and you should be fine.